Over the past few years, I've asked students in my third world politics class to write down the first three things they think of when they hear the word Africa. The results are fairly interesting. I've mapped their responses into a word cloud where the size of the word reflects the frequency of the phrase across the several hundred responses I've collected. The larger the word, the more frequently I've encountered that response. When we break the concepts down, it's easy to identify several themes. The first is wild Africa. This is the Africa of the safari, the lion, and the wildebeest. It's the Africa where the zebra and the kudu meet at the watering hole in the dry season. It's an Africa largely devoid of people, though. It's the conservationists' Africa, Disney's Africa. The second is desperate Africa. This is the media's Africa, a land of conflict and desperation where vicious warlords enforce their will over child soldiers, and the state is powerless to address the countless ongoing crises that plague the people in their daily lives. Finally, there's exotic Africa. This is the Africa that you feel. It's the home of Nelson Mandela, the good African. It's the birthplace of humanity, but it's a place defined by its otherness and its exoticness. So which of these is the real Africa? The answer is all of them and none of them. It's an overly simplified representation of a particular segment of Africa taken to represent the complex whole. Just as we would hesitate to have a single image or trope represent all of Europe or all of America, so too should we judge particular representations of the real Africa with a great deal of suspicion. And yet these images are incredibly prevalent. We see them commonly, especially in the nightly news and in the news media. In her new book, New News Out of Africa, journalist Charlene Hunter-Gault argues that Africa is covered in the Western media by 4 Ds and a C: death, disease, disaster, despair, and corruption. This representation of Africa is particularly insidious because it portrays an Africa devoid of political agency. It is an Africa that depends on the good-natured Westerner to save them. In many ways, this is the continuation of the white man's burden and the civilizing missions that characterize the colonial project around the world. It's not that there aren't problems in Africa. It's just that our map of Africa seems to center on a relatively small number of cases and a very simplistic understanding of the continent. How did our understanding of Africa come to look like this? And more importantly, what would a different map of Africa look like? What would a more accurate map of Africa look like? How can we move beyond the simple and inaccurate representations to a more accurate and more realistic and a more complex picture of Africa? We'll be spending a fair bit of time looking at the challenges of political and economic development in the global south. But right now I want to suggest that there are a lot of positives that we tend not to see, particularly in Africa. Did you know, for example, that over the past 20 years, there has been a fairly steady increase in the march towards democracy in Africa? For every dictator like Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, there's a Democrat like Joaquim Chissano in Mozambique, dedicated to ensuring that democracy takes hold and flourishes in his country. And while we tend to think of Africans living in small communal settlements without the benefits of modern technologies, a large number of people across countries in Africa live in cities composed of houses that look a lot like ours, drive cars that look a lot like ours, and live pretty mundane lives. And technology is more widespread than you probably think. Cell phones, for example, are widely used. While there's considerable range and coverage, overall Africa has a 113% coverage rate, meaning that there are more cell phones than people in Africa. Of course, this masks considerable differences between regions and countries. While 84% of all South Africans, for example, have cell phone plans, only 16% of the people in the Central African Republic do. Nevertheless, widespread access to phones permits individuals to have access to banking services, to communicate with markets in nearby cities, and to access other services. Hardly the image of the backwards Africa we typically see in our media. Similarly, we often hear about the HIV/AIDS crisis in Africa. And to be sure, HIV represents a major challenge for many governments, particularly in southern Africa, where up to 30% of the adult population between ages 15 and 40 are HIV positive. But this figure masks considerable progress in addressing the HIV/AIDS crisis. South Africa, for example, has made progress in reducing the number of deaths due to AIDS, even while the rate of infection increased through the 1990s, stabilizing only in recent years. This means that there are millions of South Africans living with AIDS. But thanks to the efforts of South African civil society and the pressure they placed on the South African government to provide free treatment for HIV-positive individuals, they are living with AIDS. But the media's coverage of Africa, we hear little of the programs that ensure access to antiretroviral medicines and the success in preventing transmission of HIV from mother to child. We hear only of the crisis. Similarly, African governments have been very successful in reducing the under 5 child mortality rates over the last 20 years. In 1990, there was a 70-point gap between the world average and the African average rate of under 5 child mortality rates. By 2011, this gap had been halved to 38 points. While there remains considerable work to be done, this represents real progress. Millions of African children who are alive today, largely because of programs that help to prevent the spread of malaria. Considerable progress has also been made in ensuring access to education. In 1992, there was a 31-point gap between the percent of primary school-aged children attending school in Africa and in the rest of the world. By 2010, the gap had been closed to just 8 points, despite the setbacks in the 1990s that resulted from the structural adjustment programs, and in 2008 as a result of the global economic crisis. What's the takeaway? Africa is a large continent composed of 53 distinct and separate countries, each with their own history, culture, society, polity, and economy. While there are similarities between them, there are also considerable differences. Africa is the world's second largest continent. The United States, China, and Western Europe could easily fit within Africa, with room left over for India and Japan. And that's a lot of room for different systems. And perhaps more importantly, the portrayal of Africa we typically see in the media does not take account of this diversity. It fails to recognize the complexity and often the progress that is taking place on the continent. So as we move forward in this course, be sure to think about how we approach Africa, let alone the entirety of the Third World.